A speech in the Rose Garden on one of America's thorniest issues. Donald Trump details how he plans to reform the country's immigration rules, but he faces an uphill battle to get the approval he needs. Frustrations mount in Khartoum's sit-in after the army temporarily called off crucial transition talks with protest leaders. The military says demonstrators are disrupting daily life with their barricades. And he left his mark on Paris by building a pyramid. The Chinese-American architect Yao Ming-pei, who transformed the look of the Louvre Museum with glass and steel, has died at the age of 102. Welcome back to the France 24 newsroom. I'm Thomas Waterhouse. First this hour, we head to Asia on this Friday's International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia and Biphobia. Crowds are braving the rain in Taiwan to find out if lawmakers have approved a bill legalizing same-sex marriage, a move which would be a first in Asia. The island's highest court gave the government a 2-year window to ring in those reforms, or else see marriage equality ushered in automatically. That deadline expires on May the 24th. Moving on, Donald Trump is aiming to attract the most brilliant people who want to build a home in the US. The president has set out his ideas for a merit-based immigration plan which would favour the highly skilled and the well-educated. Now, if his reforms get congressional approval, fewer green cards will be dished out to those with relatives already living on US soil. Peter O'Brien picks up the story.
You can come and live in the US as long as you're up to standard. That's the immigration plan Donald Trump has proposed from the White House Rose Garden.
If adopted, our plan will transform America's immigration system into the pride of our nation and the envy of the modern world.
Under the suggested changes, the amount of residency permits issued would stay the same, but a much higher proportion would be awarded for certain skills or merits. Currently, only 12% get green cards based on skills, while 2/3 go to those with family ties. But Donald Trump is looking to reverse these figures and wants applicants to pass a civics exam and learn English before they're allowed in. Efforts to overhaul the immigration system have gone nowhere for decades, and Trump's ideas are unlikely to get far in a divided Congress. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham has released his own plan, saying the White House's proposal isn't designed to become law.
I really appreciate what the president's doing today, but it starts a negotiation, I hope.
The president's plan aims to cut allowances for family members to enter, a rule which meant his Slovenian-born wife was able to get US citizenship for her parents last year.
Moving on, terrible, very extreme, and an assault on women's constitutional rights. Those are just some of the words chosen by the critics of Alabama's new law, which will ban nearly all abortions. The state governor signed the nation's most restrictive text on that issue on Wednesday, one which outlaws the termination of pregnancies except when the mother's life is at risk. Rights activists have said they'll take legal action to block the law's enforcement. Well, earlier, we spoke to a professor in constitutional law at the University of Miami in Florida. This is just a little of what Caroline Malla-Corbin had to say.
This bill will be immediately challenged, and the lower courts will strike it down because under current law, abortion is a right protected by the U.S. Constitution. Now, obviously, the goal is to have this case make its way to the Supreme Court and become the vehicle for overturning the case that established women's right to abortion. The right to abortion has been challenged since the very day it was recognized. So this is not something new. What's new is how much more extreme the laws opposing abortion have become. And this is because the Supreme Court has a new conservative majority. When Justice Kennedy resigned, although he was generally conservative, he was not prepared to completely overrule women's right to abortion. His replacement, Justice Kavanaugh, may not feel the same way. And so there may be on the Supreme Court today 5 justices who are willing to overrule decades of precedent.
Now, when asked by reporters on Thursday if the US was going to war with Iran, President Trump said he hoped not. Tensions between Washington and Tehran have, though, been mounting in recent days, and the Pentagon has also prepared options for potentially putting up to 120,000 US boots on the ground in the Middle East region if necessary. Anka Ula has more.
An optimistic note struck by Donald Trump as he welcomed Swiss President Willy Maurer to the White House. Switzerland represents U.S. interests in Iran, a crucial role as tensions mount between Tehran and Washington. The U.S. has been increasing pressure on Iran since the start of the month. According to the New York Times, it's a reaction to photographs from U.S. intelligence agencies showing fully assembled Iranian missiles on boats in the Persian Gulf. On Wednesday, the U.S. ordered non-emergency staff evacuated from its Baghdad embassy due to what it called an imminent threat from Iranian-linked militias, a threat assessment that's shared by the United Kingdom. But the same day, Trump took to Twitter to say that he's sure Iran will want to talk soon. However, Iran's foreign minister is not so sure. Speaking in Tokyo after meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, Mohammad Javad Zarif cast doubt on U.S. intentions.
I don't know where he got that certainty, but he is certainly wrong. I believe the B team is dragging the United States, or at least tries to drag the United States into a war. It's not in the interest of the United States, nor in the interest of the region.
Tehran has denounced what it calls unacceptable provocations from Washington, dismissing the idea of a military confrontation. Meanwhile, U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi warned that only Congress, and not the president, had the power to declare war.
Next, locals in the Yemeni capital have been picking up the pieces after a day of deadly airstrikes. The Saudi-led coalition says its warplanes bombed a string of legitimate military targets in and around the rebel-held city, leaving at least 6 civilians dead and dozens more injured. With more, here's Yenna Lee.
Digging through rubble to look for survivors. Residents say deadly airstrikes hit civilians in a raid that started at around 8 a.m. local time.
People were sleeping when the airstrike targeted a residential building in the neighborhood of Mayin. Women and children were targeted, 2 houses as well.
Where are the weapons? I wonder, where are the weapons?
The Saudi-led coalition launched multiple strikes on rebel-held Sana'a province on Thursday. They say they targeted military bases and weapons storage sites. The deadly raids come after Houthi insurgents claimed responsibility for drone attacks on a Saudi oil pipeline 2 days before, an attack the International Alliance qualified as a war crime. The kingdom's Vice Minister of Defense directly accused Iran, saying the terrorist attacks ordered by the regime in Tehran and carried out by the Houthis are tightening the noose around the ongoing political efforts. Riyadh backs Yemeni President Abdrabbuh Mansour Hadi and his forces. Behind them is an international coalition, including weapons from the UK, the US and France. On the other side, Houthi rebels are aligned with Tehran. The more than 4-year-long conflict is largely seen as a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Meanwhile, the humanitarian disaster in Yemen continues.
Time is running out. We won't get another chance. 15 million children in Yemen are asking you to save their lives. Please help them. They need peace.
The United Nations describes the conflict as the world's worst humanitarian crisis. 2/3 of the population is in need of aid.
The blend of groups which makes up Sudan's opposition alliance has expressed regrets after the country's army suspended transition talks with protest leaders. In the fallout from veteran leader Omar al-Bashir's departure, the military has paused talks for 72 hours until the barricades come down. James Vecina has more.
They've been given an ultimatum but are refusing to back down. Protesters continue to gather across the capital city of Khartoum despite the army's warnings. The military council are blaming protesters for wreaking economic havoc across the city and wants them to dismantle their barricades. But distrust of the transition process is growing as protesters ask for democratic elections to be held as soon as possible.
We don't trust in transitional military council because after Bashir forced to step down, we spent so much time waiting for handling the power to, let's say, civilian government. But till now, we have a month and 6 days. But they always delay time, so this is a problem.
Army generals and protest leaders were expected to sign an agreement on Thursday. It would have seen the start of a 3-year transition period to instill civilian rule in Sudan. But at the last minute, the military council came back on its decision, insisting that protesters comply with their requests within 72 hours for talks to resume.
We decided the following: to suspend the negotiations for 72 hours until an appropriate atmosphere is reached to sign the agreement, and to remove all the barricades outside the sit-in site.
With only 2 days left now before the end of the ultimatum, it looks unlikely for the moment that protesters will back down and comply with the army's requests.
Here in France, a doctor has been released on bail after being charged with poisoning 17 more patients at a clinic in the eastern city of Besançon. That brings the total number of charges levelled against Frédéric Péchier to 24, 9 of whom have died. His lawyer says the presumption of innocence must, though, be stressed.
Renowned anesthesiologist or serial poisoner. 47-year-old French doctor Frédéric Péchier is now under investigation for poisoning 24 patients after a judge added 17 new cases to his rap sheet on Thursday. The patients were aged 4 to 80, all victims of a mysterious cardiac arrest. 7 of the 17 died. The investigation took 2.5 years. Specialists were called in and 4 bodies were exhumed. The public prosecutor believes there is proof that Dr. Péchier tampered with his colleagues' anesthesia pouches, administering lethal doses of potassium.
Mr. Péchier seems to be the common denominator in these tragic events, which seem to have taken place within a context of acute conflict with his medical colleagues. We're dealing with a particularly clever health professional who acted when there was no one in the anesthesia room, who knew how to vary his timing and the nature of the poison administered in order not to arouse suspicions.
Often found close to the operating block, he's the one who was called in every emergency, the only one present at every incident. And since he stopped practicing at this clinic in eastern France, the suspicious cardiac arrests have stopped. His lawyer said the investigation proves nothing.
We're operating under the assumption that he's the one who did this. It's easy to say it's him, to imagine that it's him, but proving it is a different story. We've said it before, there's no proof against Mr. Péchier.
Péchier acknowledged criminal acts at the clinic, but says he was not the one responsible for the poisonings. If convicted, he could face a life sentence.
Next, the man who brought a touch of Egypt to one of Paris's oldest monuments has passed away. The celebrated architect Yo Ming-pei, who was responsible for designing the iconic steel and glass pyramid at the Louvre Museum, has died at the age of 102.
His works have created landmarks across the world. Chinese-American architect Yo Ming-pei, commonly known as I.M.Pei, has passed away at the age of 102. From museums to public buildings, from hotels to schools, his modern designs shaped the landscapes of cities worldwide. Born in China, I.M.Pei moved to the United States to study architecture, later becoming a US citizen. His works carry a distinctive trademark, often combining stone, steel and glass with an emphasis on natural light. Some of his most renowned buildings include the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Bank of China Tower, or more recently the Museum of Islamic Art in Qatar. But his greatest achievement remains his renovations on the Louvre Museum in Paris, a controversial project that's caused a stir when the French president chose a foreign architect for the job, who wanted to bring a modern twist to an architecturally conservative city. Completed in 1993, the Louvre remains the most visited museum in the world. A highly acclaimed architect of the 20th century, I.M.Pei's masterworks will remain celebrated landmarks for years to come.
That's all for now. Do stay with us here on France 24.